Okay. Whether you're married, so that would be maybe something like this, like true or false. Could be, so it could be a Boolean. Um, or it maybe you might have like if you maybe want to be more fancy, you might have like status. And if you think about the Facebook relationship status, they just give you like a few options, right? There's not like you can't just type. Well, I don't think you can just type whatever you want, can you? So it's like single. It's complicated, married or whatever. So there's just a discrete set of options, and that is typically called what's called an enum, an enumerator, and it's just a way to like limit something to a certain set of options. Um, so, but if you didn't know about that, then you could have just like used a string and said like, okay, I'm gonna have a string for status, and it should either be single or married, or it's complicated. Uh, so that's like another way you could have maybe done it. And then your birthday. So birthday. So this is an interesting one. So this would be like a date, right? And technically it would be like a date and a time. So from what you guys have learned so far, which type would you probably use for that? For a date?
Some object with like month, day, and year.
That's a good idea. Yeah. And then if you weren't gonna do that, what do you think? What's another option? String. Yeah, just string. So it could be just a string, whereas like and most developers don't write dates the way Americans write dates because the way Americans write dates is really stupid. Because like it's hard to know which one's the month and the day. So this is ISO format where you do year. I can put my actual birthday, but year and then hyphen and then month and then day is typically how you'll see a developer write a date. But this is also, so this is a string and like, if you have a date, you typically want to do stuff with the date. You want to say like there's like operations you want to be able to do. Like, how many years ago is this date? Or like add a month to this date, or take this date and this date and tell me the time span between them. So there's like a bunch of date operations you may want to do. So there's actually a type in JavaScript called datetime. And so instead of it being a string, it's like a fancy number that represents how many milliseconds since like 1970 or something like that. And then it allows you to do all these data operations on it. But if you had done this, that's good for now, based on what you know. So yeah, there's your object, and that's your warm-up. Very good. So we had our competition. Nice, Gia. Yes. But I don't think it's that. I think it's like you would do new date time. I don't think that. I think date is a literal function like that. So I think it was like. New. And you haven't seen the new keyword yet. But I think it's something like this. Oh, maybe it is date. Yeah, it's date. Sorry. I'm thinking of a different thing. So yeah, new date. And then if you don't pass it anything, it just takes the current moment. So you can see if I just do new date, it's like, okay, right now. In central time. Or you can pass it like pass it a string like that. And it'll parse it. No, I'm not trying to teach you that. I'm just trying to make you aware of that. As a concept. What was that? Was someone mute? Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, so new capital D date, and then I don't know if that's the right, that might be the right syntax for it, I'm not sure. Okay. All right, okay, yeah, so we had our little competition. I was gonna pick one winner, but it was too close to call. There was like too many good projects. But what was interesting is there was 10 applicants, 6 female, 4 males, and the females kicked the guy's ass. So all the females that turned in a project won. And so you'll have to share the prize. And so when we go out next, I'll get food and beverages for the females. And if you don't go out with us when we have our meetup, I'll get you a gift card. So, yeah. That's very, very encouraging to me. We usually like have females when we start and then none when we end. And I'm not sure why historically. And I feel like the tides are changing. So it's very exciting to me. So yeah, round of applause for the females that did the project. It was really impressive. And there was a lot of like there was a ton of stuff that hasn't been taught yet. So I saw a lot of people getting ahead and it was great. If you're a male, don't be too disturbed. All the projects were really good. They were all really good. Okay. All right, so what you guys learned for today's class, it was kind of a hodgepodge, but the main thing that you were trying to learn is looping. So we'll talk about looping real quick. So there's a few different ways to write a loop. We're only going to worry about the for loop at the moment. I don't often find myself using a while loop. So we'll just focus on kind of learning the for loop pretty well. But if I wanted to do something 10 times, does anybody know, like if I just want to console log hello 10 times, does anybody know what I would type if I'm using a for loop? So the first thing I type is for, and then does anybody know? Like the for loop has kind of 3 pieces to it. What's the first? Like it's kind of got this funky syntax where it uses semicolons instead of commas. But just think of it as like 3 parameters, sort of. So what's the first parameter?
Initialize your start point. Like zero.
Yeah. So typically you'll see var I or let I. I've sort of said, hey, don't worry about let for now. But you'll see most people use let over var in a for loop and often. But let's just use var. So var, and then you pick what variable name you want to use. It can be any variable name. Most people use, because they're lazy, I or J or K or stuff like letters like that. And typically you'll see I, but if you're like nesting for loops, then you can't use the same variable name twice. So you'll see people start with I, and then if they have like another loop inside the loop, they'll use like J or something like that. And then I just stands for index, typically, I think is what people mean by that. So var I equals, and then you just pick where you want to start. It may, like often you'll see 0 as the starting point, but just because things are 0-based index, and you're often trying to like access like an array when you're looping. But like depending on the use case, it may make sense to start at 100, or and it may just make sense to use a different number. But often it's 0. So yeah, that's the first parameter. What's the second parameter? Yeah, yeah. We want, what did I say? Loop 10 times, console log 10 times. So we would do less than 10, because we start at 0,
Oh, yeah.
so 0 to 9. But yeah, so this is the, I actually don't know what this is called, continue. Cool. Whether or not to keep looping is what this parameter is. So you want to, you give it a true or false, like you're gonna do something that returns a true or false. If it returns true, then it will keep looping. If it returns false, it'll stop looping. So this is like the continue condition or something like that. So yeah, we'll do I less than 10. So that's an expression that evaluates to true or false, and that's what the loop means. And then what's this parameter?
Increment. So like I plus plus.
Yeah, and so in our case, yeah, it's how we want to increment, and just more like plain English, it's like after each loop, what do you want to do? Because if you don't do anything, it'll loop forever. So there's got to be something that's changing. So we're using I here, we're using I here, and then we need, so if we don't ever change I, then it'll loop forever, assuming, like, at least the way we set it up here. Like I would stay 0, and so then 0 is always less than 10, and so it would loop forever. So we have to do something at the end of the loop to sort of progress. And so, yeah, in this case, we would do I plus plus. And then we do curly braces or wiggles. And then I just said console log. So yeah, that's correct. So let me just slide server. And yeah, we should see a syntax error. Yeah, it's date times, Geo is right, it's not date times, it's date. So let's see. Yeah, there we go. So I fixed that error, which, like, I mean, I knew exactly what it was, but if you were trying to debug it, you would read the error very carefully, and then you would look at the line where it's happening, which is 15. You go to line 15, and then you stare at that for a minute, figure out what's wrong, and fix it. Okay, so we saw hello log 10 times. So yeah, we did our loop. That's perfect. Now that's this isn't particularly useful, right? So we've got this object that we made up here, and maybe we want to know some information about Zach's pets. So there may be 1 pet in this array, there may be 2 pets, there may be 3 pets, there may be 100 pets, right? So like when you don't know how long something is at the time that you're coding it, you use a loop, because a loop is just basically it's just saying, hey, I need to do something however many times some condition or some data or something. So often you have data where there's an array and you just don't know how much data you're going to have. So you say, okay, we'll just loop based off how much data I have. So loop the length of the array is typically why you're looping. Or I mean, yeah, it's like very often use case. So like we'll see today when we're doing our shopping cart stuff for our garage sale. It's like you may have 10 things in your garage sale, you may have 5 things in your garage sale, you may have 100 things. And so with a loop, you can just say, however many items I have, like loop through and like put each item on the page, or various other use cases that we'll see. So yes, you're very often when you're doing a loop, you're doing it because you've got a variable number of elements within some data structure. So if I want to log each of my pets' names, I will do for var I equals 0, I less than my data dot pets dot length I plus plus. And since I'm starting, like, since our arrays are zero-based index, and since I'm starting with 0, like, what's going to happen is this will loop 3 times, and each time so I will be 0, and then I will be 1, and then I will be 2. So if I console log pets, or sorry, not that, but my data dot pets, and then like I want to see each pet name here. So yeah, what do I put here? Yeah. Yeah, so there are my pets. And let's say I want to know, so remember before we had to, we were trying to figure out how many, or like the total price of the shopping cart. And I was like, we don't know how to do this quite yet. We don't know looping yet. And so I did that like fancy and reduce thing. Now that you know about looping, you can do sort of like the primitive way that we typically did summaries. So if you want to just know how many pets I have, does anybody know what we might do? So we're gonna, like, we want to have a variable that will store the number of pets that Zach has. So it should say 3. And I'm going to use this loop to do it. So does anybody know what to do to make that happen? Yeah. Well, I made this more complicated. I mean, this is the dumbest example I've ever seen. I mean, obviously, we can just ask for the length of the array. But imagine, let's just say we can't do that. Does anybody have a really silly way to do it? What?
Some of my, or
Yeah, I mean, yeah, what you'll typically see, I'll think of a better example here in a second. What you'll typically see is like var total equals 0. So you'll just like set it to 0. And then you would just like add, you would do total plus equals, so typically not I. Okay, I'm sorry. Let me just give you a better example. So let's just say I have my salary for the past 5 years or something. So it's been 0 for the past 2 years. So and then and then we're not going to put real numbers here, but let's just say this has been my historical yearly salary or something, right? So if we want to get the sum total of money I made in the past 5 years, like we can't ask for length because the answer is not 5. So let's say that's what we're doing. So we're doing my data dot salaries dot length, and I'm starting with total at 0. And then what do you guys think I would do on this line here? So we'll do something here and then const log total. So what do I do here?
Reference the high position of your salaries object as sum up against the total.
That's right. So we'll do total, and then there's the plus equals. But we're not like plus equaling I, we're plus equaling my data dot salaries and then the index that we're. So we're gonna go through each index of this, or each element of this array, grab the value. So that's what we're doing here. So my data dot salaries I will be 0 and then 0 and then 100 and then 200 and 300. And so we do total, which starts at 0. This like initialize a variable outside the loop and then modify it inside the loop is really common. So we start with 0, and so we do 0 plus equals 0. So after the first loop, total is still 0. Second loop, total plus equals 0, so still 0. And then we do 0 plus equals 100, so it's 100. And then 100 plus equals 200, so we're at 300. And then we do 300 plus equals 300, so we're at 600. And yeah, that's what we see. Okay. So inside a for loop, like inside the wiggles here, you can have as much code as you want. Like it's like you can do anything you want in there. So it doesn't have to be short. It can be, you can do like a ton of stuff in there. Okay, any questions? So this is a cool moment for all of you. So maybe this is the first time you've learned programming language. And if that's so, then you just have like learned all the fundamental stuff that is typically there in a programming language. So like you can, at this point, well, you know, you can write any program. Now, there's a lot more to learn about the language, and I learn more stuff about it every day, but it's just like extra stuff that makes it easier to do very specific things. Like you learn the fundamentals, and like the next module is all JavaScript still, but like it's like different ways to do sort of the same thing, or like cleaner ways to do it. And then just like just stuff. It's not like you have the fundamentals down now. So that's really exciting. And the project we did, the garage sale project, like with now knowing about objects and arrays and about looping and about branching logic, like we can make the code for the garage sale much more elegant, clean, dynamic. So yeah, we'll be able to take the stuff we just learned and make the garage sale project a lot better. So oh, we need to do the GitHub desktop thing. So let me just finish my thought about this though. So there was a few problems when we were initially doing the garage sale project in class. One one of the problems is that we were duplicating code for every item that we had. So we had, let's say, 5 items that we wanted to put up for sale. And we were like, it's like each item is sort of the same thing, right? They all have the same schema, meaning they all have the same attributes like name, price, picture. And they all do the same thing. You click on a button to add it to the cart, you go to the cart, you can remove it from the cart. So the functionality that we need to code is like not identical for each item, but like pretty much, like it's the same thing. Like we're like trying to create behavior around something that would be for sale, and it shouldn't matter the specifics of what is for sale. Like our code doesn't need to know that. It should be dynamic enough to be able to handle a different name or a different price. So we had one issue where with the tools we had, we couldn't write what's called dry code, meaning, so dry means do not repeat yourself. So anytime you're like copying and pasting the same thing, and not the exact same thing, but like roughly the same thing, that's a sign that you should be able to like extract it, make a function that is like takes a parameter and then, so you don't have to duplicate your code. Duplicating your code is just like, it's not good because if you then need to change one small thing, you're changing it in multiple places, it's harder to read. And it just makes it so that the project's harder to maintain and update. So that was one problem, and we have tools now to fix it. And then the other problem is like, well, I guess that's really sort of the fundamental problem. But now that we know about arrays and objects, we can, rather than like hard coding data into our HTML and into our functions for every item, we can just store our items as raw data. So remember when we looked at the New York Times cooking site and we saw like, oh, they don't actually like hard code any of the data that's on the site in the HTML. They receive from the backend this array of objects that's describing everything that should be on the page. So like they store the information in an object, and then the JavaScript loops through the array and creates the HTML from the data. So you make like a template for what the HTML should look like, and then you just inject the data into that template, and then you just loop based off how many, in this example, recipes you have to fill out the page. So now that we have a way to kind of store any sort of dynamic information we may need and that we can loop, we can follow that pattern to make really dynamic websites. So we see this pattern of we have a site, but we generate information on the site from the data, and then when people interact with the site, it may change some data on our end, and then we sort of regenerate the site. So it's this sort of like data-driven approach to the way that the website should look. So yeah, what we'll do with the time we have left is just kind of applying that style to the garage sale. And a lot of you kind of, or some of you kind of, I think, figured that out and did that on your site, which is cool to see. But first, let's do GitHub Desktop real quick, and then we'll work on and we'll take a break and then we'll work on the garage sale. Just because we're going to go a bit longer today, and I don't know, after an hour, it's hard to listen to somebody talk, like move around and stuff. Okay, so everyone should install GitHub Desktop. So just go to Google and do GitHub Desktop. And you should get this link here. And then it should allow you to download that. So go ahead and download that. Give everyone just a second to do that. Okay, so yeah, you should have GitHub desktop. And if you're opening it for the first time, you won't probably see this screen. I wonder if I can. I guess I probably can't. So you won't see anything up here because I tested this before I showed you this time. So I already have a repository up here. But there should be something somewhere that lets you do. Or so also you need to log in first. So it's probably asking you to log in. Let me see if I can log out. So it should be asking you to log in. So go ahead and do that. You just need to give it your username and password, and then you should be good to go. So go ahead and do that. Okay. And then from there, there should be something up here that gives you this add button. And there should be something that says like create a new repository or add a repository. So I'm gonna click this, and then there's a few options here. So we can clone a repository, which is what we were trying to do last class. So we had made a repository in GitHub, and then we cloned it to our local computer. So that's one option if you like already made the repository in GitHub. You can actually also create a new repository straight from here. So you don't actually have to do that in GitHub first. So you can do create new repository, and then you pick a name. So I'm going to do garage sale final class, maybe, or just garage sale 2 or something. I'll just do garage sale 2 because I'm going to put the garage sale stuff in my curriculum right now. You can then put a description if you want to, not totally necessary. And then choose where you want this to go. So I'm putting it in my OK coders folder. So you don't need to put like for where you choose for it to go, you don't need to put folder / garage sale 2. Like you just need to put the folder you want it to be in, and then it will make a folder called the same thing as this name. So it will make a folder called garage sale 2 inside this OK coders folder for me. That will then have the repo. So choose that path, and then don't do any of these other things. Initialize this repo with the README. It's just gonna like make a README file and then probably put garage sale 2 at the top of it or something like that. But we'll do that manually. So then just hit create repository. So you can see I've got this folder now. Okay, and then from there. So it was like, I don't know why it was kind of dark, but go ahead and click. And then they actually give you a helpful open and Visual Studio Code over here. So hit that, open a Visual Studio Code. And then I'm going to add a README. And then just put garage sale 2 test. Save it. So we're in that local folder for that repo. We've added a new file. And so now if you save that and go back to GitHub Desktop, you should see that it knows about that change. It's showing you, hey, you changed a file, you changed the README file. And what you did was add one line, and here's what you added to that line. So if you're done working, or you want to create like a stopping point for your work, you can commit that. And so it's already giving me like a helpful hint of what I should best like use for my message. So yeah, create README. And then I can click commit to main, which is the branch that we're on. Don't worry about that. There's only, you only see, it says current branch main up here. In the coding world, we create branches, which are sort of like copies of the project. Because you'll have like 10 devs working on one project. And so each dev will have their own branch that they're working on. But since you're working on this alone, you don't need to worry about branches. You just stay with the main branch. So we're going to commit to main. And so it did that. So if we look at history, we can see I did that commit. And then we can click this publish to GitHub now. And I'm gonna not have it be private. It's naming it here, so we want to keep that same name, and then you just need to pick which organization you want it to go into. And if you probably won't have this because you're probably not part of any org. So I'm doing none, which should be my personal GitHub, which I'm guessing is, I'm guessing you're not seeing that where it's already on none for you. So I could publish. And then that should be synced, and then I can hit view on GitHub. And you can see, yeah, so it did put it in my ZMaze GitHub profile. And you can see it's got the stuff I just did on it. So if you go and add something, you just follow that same workflow. So maybe you add, in class.html, and then you add some HTML to it. Right, you're done for the day, you want to push it up, you just go back to GitHub Desktop, you can see the change you made. Maybe it's multiple files, which is fine. So maybe you've added like a bunch of code, a bunch of files, that's okay. You would just go back to GitHub Desktop, commit again, more stuff, commit to main, and then up here you just want to, so you committed, but you haven't actually synced it with GitHub yet, so you just need to hit this push version thing again. So I'm going to hit push, so it's syncing with GitHub again. And so now GitHub was updated with that new change, adding that HTML. So that's how you can start pushing stuff to GitHub Desktop, and start getting those green dots on your profile. If you had any trouble with that, like just paying me or one of the mentors to just have like a quick session and they can see what's happening and help you with it. Okay, let's take like a 5-minute break real quick. And then we'll start coding.
Oh, I know we shouldn't. Oh, okay. Yeah. 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 I can do it. I didn't do it. Yeah, so that was like, did you? No. It's this one. This is what Brian says we go always in and we do the 9-6 or something then. So we would do the. Yeah,
Right,
that's
that's
it.
very sweet.
Yeah.
Yeah. But still, 100. Yeah. So this is just pure cash. Yeah. But I mean. It's gonna be. Pretty hard. Yeah. I should be selling that, like the most overhead. So it's hard to provide.
Oh, yeah. No, I was looking at that, I was like, I don't know if I even remember my code well enough to start modifying it. You did? I thought they had like a draft or something. Right. Wait, you're doing that? Okay. Tell me, all right.
And she's gonna be a fool. My colleague doesn't
That's
have,
sick.
like, coordinator.
So it sounds like you're like someone that near you. Where you.
Yeah, so when we first started. I'm struggling enough. Just like, they were like, oh, you know, we got it. And raising my friend. Because it's where.
Yeah.
Like, absolutely not. I was like, I have my own car insurance, like, this is not how we're gonna do this. And he's a business owner in Choctaw, where I'm from. I started building him, and I was like, so you're refusing to give me your insurance information, you have it on, which I don't.
Yeah.
And it was just, it was a nightmare. And
Oh, yeah. Start to power with that for sure. Good thing you can do that. Sounds like a pretty significant hit. Like that was not light.
he said that he didn't know that he did it. I'm like, oh crap.
Yeah. Yeah, like with this truck or something.
Justice.
That's a viral Reddit text right there.
Literally, like, because I got the man's face and the video and stuff, I'm like, this could go viral. No, no.
Everyone likes justice videos.
So,
So that's your excuse for not. Bigger episode project.
well.
Yeah, what you get.
All right, top to it. All right, so. So I'm gonna make a folder called garage sale. And then I'm going to make a file called index.html, which is often like what the like main entry point into the project is called. Like the main page. And then I'm gonna do the JavaScript in a separate file this time, so I'll do index.js. Okay, and I'm gonna have the HTML on the left and then the JavaScript on the right. And so we need some HTML, so I'll put in my HTML. Some funny things that people have. Maybe this is an okay cover, so. Okay, and then we'll do body here, and then I'm gonna link my index.js to this. So I'll do script. Source. And then it's like right next to this same file, so I can do /index.js, or I could just done index.js. So dot means, and you'll learn more about this when you start learning the command line, but dot means current directory. And then let me just do console log to make sure that it's all linked up. And then let me put some actual HTML on this. I actually don't like this theme because I don't know what it's sell. So, maybe it's OK Coder's alumni garage sale, so it can just be anything that the alumni is. All right. See here, hello, yeah, so we're linked up, good to go. Okay, so first thing we've sort of learned about is, let's create the data that we're gonna need. So we're gonna have cost items for sale. That will be an array of objects. So what are some of the properties we know we're gonna need for the items for sale? Like what are some of the keys? Yeah, what's it on? Yeah.
It actually is.
Price. $10.99. What else? Description. Anything else?
On mine, I put my images in there.
Yeah, we can put the images in here. So this would be like, there's a few ways this could be done, like, it could be a link to just any image on the internet. Or you can download the image and have it be in your directory. I'll just Google images and just use those links, which is totally fine. So. Dude, I have this, I have a Mocha Master, it's the best coffee pot. I love this thing. And it comes in all these cool colors, and we got black, and I really wish it's not black. So maybe I am selling it, that's correct. So you want the image address, so you want. Yes. Okay, so yeah, it's just gonna be a string. Is that the right? Yeah, I guess so. It's kind of small. Oh. It's a little better. And this is like, I don't know, this is like my browser's like image search link. Typically you would want like the link from the actual website, but it's okay. It'll still work. Okay, and then so this is just like the base information that we need of stuff we want to have for sale. Then there's no right or wrong way here. Then there's going to be information based off of how someone's interacted with the site. And that's like, is that item in their cart? And so we can store that, and it's like, so most people store the cart as a separate thing, which I think is totally fine. I'm just kind of showing you there's more than one way to do this. So like we can have a separate shopping cart, and then we would just need to somehow represent whether or not an item from this array of objects, so the items for sale, like if we do it that way, we just need like const shopping cart equals some array, and then we just need to decide like what are we going to put in the array that represents that an item from the items for sale is in the shopping cart. Like how do you do that? You just need to sort of decide how you want to do it. So we can do it that style. We could also basically add a boolean to the items for sale that's like in cart. But the thing is with that, you're sort of mixing this like raw, clean data with this like runtime, how someone's used the site data. And someone might be like, I don't really like that. And then you get into all these opinions and stuff. We can do it this way where we have a set of shopping cart, but then you just have to decide, well, how do we represent each item? And there's a few ways we can do that. We can just do it based off the index that the item's in. So like if the coffee pot's in the shopping cart, we could say, okay, add 0 to the shopping cart. And basically would say like this index is in the shopping cart. So go find the 0 item for sale that's in the shopping cart. So that's one thing we can do. We can also add an ID to each object. And you'll see people do that sometimes, like where there's ID. And then you got to decide what you want this to be. This could be a number, this could be 0, which would then make it just like the index. So that's a little confusing. Or it could be what's called more like a natural key. So you can like have it be something like coffee pot or something like that, or like something that's like the combination of the attributes of the object. But just some way to identify it. So let's go with this ID approach and just see, like you can just pick one and you're not really sure why you're picking it, and then you just keep coding, and then eventually it'll be like, oh, I don't like this anymore, I'm gonna not do it that way. And that's fine too, because you'll like learn more about how the program is gonna be set up, and you like as you write more and more functions and you start stringing them together, you're like, you know what, if I had done it this way, some of this would be a little bit easier. And that's fine, and you just like refactor it at that point if you think it makes sense to do that. So like it's okay, you don't have to like sit here and like debate like, wow, which way am I gonna do it for a really long time? Like you can just kind of like go and then kind of learn and iterate as you're working the program. So for no good reason, and I'm serious, like I'm working on this live, like I didn't do this beforehand, because I often want you guys to see the process of like working on something. So I actually don't know what I'm gonna prefer, so let's just go with this approach and see what happens. All right, so we have our items for sale, and then we're gonna have the shopping cart, which based off the way we're doing it right now, is gonna contain the IDs of each object. So like if we add something to the shopping cart, if like that coffee pot, we then have that in the array. And so we know like, okay, use this string to look up an object by ID in the items for sale. Okay. Let's add just one more item for sale. So I'm going to copy this whole object, paste it down here. And then, oh, we need to up the price of that coffee pot. So maybe we're selling coffee grinder. So okay, so we've got like the raw data that's gonna make up like some of the, like we call it cards, like this kind of like grouping of information. So we have that data. So so now we need to figure out, so we haven't done a ton in this class of creating dynamic HTML. We've done a lot of like on click and like responding to events in the HTML page. We haven't done a lot where we're using JavaScript to create the page itself on the first render. So yeah, so we haven't seen that very much, but that's very common. And that's kind of maybe the first thing to tackle is, okay, we need to come up with how we want each element to look, and we need to like create a template that we then inject the data into. And so the first thing I think to do is basically like you want to, when you're solving problems, you want to try to think of like, okay, there's a whole overarching large problem, but that's made up of smaller problems, and those smaller problems are made up of other smaller problems. And so you want to kind of just like find one small thing to tackle, and then basically you just write a function that solves that problem. So we're going to write a function, and the function is going to take not all of the objects, but just one of them. So we're going to take, the function will take in data for one item for sale and then return the HTML for that item. That's all it's going to do. It's not going to put it on the page. It's not going to loop through the array. It's just going to go, okay, data to HTML. And that's like, we're just going to solve that one problem, right? Could we break that problem down more? Maybe. I don't think so. We'll find out. So we're going to write a function, and this is item to display HTML or something like that. Item to card or item to for sale card or whatever you want to call And this will take in, so you could delineate every property. You can also take an object as a parameter. So you know, how, like you can pass a string as a parameter, you can pass a number as a parameter. You can also pass an array, you can pass an object. So let's just say they're gonna pass in the full object. So the object that has ID, price, name, description, image. Instead of doing like ID, comma, price, comma, name, comma, description, comma, image as the parameters, we're just gonna say item, and we're just gonna assume that that's gonna be the full object that'll be passed in. So at that point, we can do like inside our function, we'd be able to do item dot ID or item dot price or item dot name because it's the object. Okay, so to make HTML dynamically and to inject variables like JavaScript variables, that essentially is making a string. So we're essentially like to make HTML in JavaScript, you're essentially making a string. Because there's no HTML type in JavaScript. There's just the string is the closest thing to it. So that's typically what you'll see people do. Though when we learn React, there's actually a special type you use in React to make HTML. It's a little bit easier. But for plain JavaScript, we just use a string. So whenever we've been making strings and like doing like the dynamic inject variable, blah, 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 what do we typically use for that? Yeah, so we will use inner HTML, but like whenever we would like make like like an error message, and we had to like use a variable to inject into the string for the error message, we didn't use like the double quotes or the single quotes. We used what thing? Yeah, the backtick. So the template string is what that's called. So we're gonna and then so we're gonna use the backtick, and we can actually just to make it formatted a little bit better, we can do this on one line like that. And so we can just kind of like we're doing it back, like we're doing a template string, but you can do it on multiple lines. The backtick one specifically, you can't do it with single quote or double quote, I don't think. But it has to be on one line, I think. But with the backtick, you can. And so we can just write HTML here. But then whenever we need to inject the specifics of the one item that we're dealing with, we'll use the JavaScript inject thing. Like so we can put in like item.id by using that $wiggle thing. So typically we'd be writing like messages with like if we had an error, we'd say like, oh, sorry, you bumped into an error. And then you'd inject the error message is what the example we're using for. But in this case, we're writing HTML and we're injecting the dynamic data. So I don't know what we want this item card to look like. It's gonna look terrible because I'm not gonna do much about that, but it might be like a div. And then in the div, we might have like an H4 or something, which will be the name. And then we might have like a P tag, which would be the description. And then we might have like, I don't know, like an emphasis tag, which would be price. And then we also need the image somewhere. So that might be between the title and description, maybe. Okay. And so we just need to, sorry, this item can't be there. So like I'm writing HTML, but it's really just a string. But that's okay. Because what we're going to do is we're going to do that inner HTML equals this string eventually. Okay, so. So this is supposed to be the name, so inside this, we'll put. Item.name. For the image, we're gonna do source equals. Item.image. Because the image property of our object is a link. And so we just need to set the source, I think the source on image. And then inside the p tag, we need the item description. And then inside the emphasis, we need item price. And then we can basically return this HTML from this function. So we could have just not assigned it and returned it directly up here, but it's also okay to do it this way. Okay, so like, that's like just one small piece of our problem, right? And so it's nice to make functions like as simple as like what's called single responsibility as possible. So like this function is just taking the item and creating some HTML and returning it. It's not also adding it to the page. It's not looping through everything. Like it's just this one responsibility. And if you kind of follow that practice, it'll make your code a little bit cleaner. So the other thing we need to do is we know we need to loop and we need to add it to the page. So we may have a function that's like add items to page or add items for sale to page. In this, it could take a parameter. And we would just have to pass items for sale to it. I think it's okay for us to just kind of reach out to items for sale. So it's not going to take a parameter and it's just going to directly access this items for sale array. So yeah, we want to loop through the items for sale. So we do that with for var I 0, I less than items for sale dot length, I plus plus. And so we need to access each element. So items for sale index. So that will be each element in that array of items for sale. And then we have a function that takes the item and gives you the HTML. So we can assign this to a variable if we want. So we can con, or we can't do. Yeah, sorry, I don't do for this right. I'm trying to remember if I can put a const here. I think I can put a const here, right? Because the brackets will be like the bracket will do a new scope, right? I think. What do you? Oh, I thought you were talking. Oh, we'll just see what happens. So I think I can do a constant here. So const, item. And then we'll call our function that we made item to display HTML, pass it item. So this would be const HTML for item. Okay, and then we need, so we have the HTML, we need to figure out where we want to put it on the page, and we need like a spot for where we're gonna add stuff to the page. So we may do, over here, we may do like a div. And we may do like ID equals items slot or something. You often hear people use slot for like something that doesn't have anything in it, and it's where you're supposed to like, it's like your injection point into a page. So I'm just making an empty div, which is where like I wanna put these cards, below the heading of the p tag. So I'm making a div that is below the heading of the p tag where I'm gonna inject the items. So I did that. So whenever we add items for sale to the page, we just need to have that div. So we can do that inside this function, or we can do it outside the function and just kind of reference it in the function. So we may up here somewhere do, const items slot equals document.get element by ID items slot. And then we'll do, so we just create element to make our element, and then we'll do slot. It's like we have that div, but then we want, like, we don't want to do inner HTML multiple times because we would just like erase all the HTML. Like with like we would, if we did that in the loop, we'd be like, okay, inner HTML of that slot is this first card. And then you would, on the second one, you'd be like, okay, well, now it's the second card and then the third card. So we need to add elements to this slot. So we need to append information to it. And so, yeah, the first thing we'll do is HTML for the item, but we don't actually have like we have something we can do inner HTML with. We don't have like an element that we can append yet. So we need to make the appendable element. So that's document.create headings. Create element. And we want to make, I think we can just make a div. do appendable element dot inner HTML equals HTML or item. Uh, item slot dot end child, I guess. Is that the same as pen? Difference from pen child. I mean, I think a pen's fine. I don't really fully understand the difference between those two quite yet, but. So we're gonna append to the item slot each of these elements that we created, so. Element. And we just did a lot of code without checking it, so we need to kind of check in and see if there's any bugs. And we also, like, if we run this now, sorry, let me make a sneak see this. So I know that might have been a lot of time, but we got our data here. We have our empty shopping cart. We grab this div that we added to the page, which is where we want to add the cards. And then we've got our function that takes one of our items for sale, the data for the items for sale, and creates HTML out of it. And then we've got a function that we wrote that's going to loop through all the items for sale, take each element and make that HTML, like injected HTML, make a div and then append that div, or make a div, add that HTML to the div, and then append that div to the slot div. Okay, and then, so we don't actually call this function yet, so nothing's gonna happen on our page until we do that, so we need to call add items for sale to page. And this is where, like, I was like, I could make a parameter function or not, and if I made it a parameter function, when I call it here, I would just have to pass it items for sale. And then also it pulls in that, the slot, like it reaches outside of the function in the global scope for items for sale and for item slot. That's okay. We could pass it in or we could not. And we're not in this case. And so that's one thing. What's nice about this small function here, this item to display HTML, you read the function and there's nothing else you really need to know besides the body of the function. When you read this function, add items for sale to the page, you start reading it and you're like, okay, well, what the hell is items for sale? And so you have to go look at that array of objects to know what that is. And then it's like, well, what is appendable element? And you have to go look at the rest of the code for appendable element to know what that is. It's like whenever you have a function that reaches into the global scope, it then requires the reader of that function to also look at the global scope to have the full context of what's happening. So this function here, I'm a little bit more proud of than this one. That's okay. So yeah, let's just check in. Yeah. Look at that. I think it's great. Okay. So Yeah, no, I think everything's working as expected so far, so that's always nice. I usually expect errors at that point though. But yeah, this is pretty good. The images, we're not specifying a size for the image, so we may want to do that. There's multiple ways we decide to do that. I mean, for this, like, we may just target images directly and just give it our width and height. Or we can do something in this function. Maybe set that, or we could have like a class, maybe be more specific. But maybe just do. Well, yeah, normally what someone would do is add a CSS file. And then link that in. Is that source too? Or is it link? Atra. So whenever you start, like whenever you get further along, like no one actually does this. Like the tooling and everything that we use, like when we do like React or like any other more modern framework, like you don't do this kind of manual stuff as much. And so like that's why I can't remember because I don't ever do it. Not that I, ashamed or anything. But yeah, href would be ./index.css. And then honestly, I haven't written CSS in so long. I guess I want to do image. And then I want to do maybe 50 height. Yeah, so I guess it's not href. It's like,
Curious, you know, you have image on there.
it is href, but I mean, I've really checked it. So it's not style, it's link. And then it is href, and then you have to do relative equals such. Okay. That's 50 pixels? Really? I guess so. Sorry, it's been so long since I've been doing game development. And I haven't been doing front end development for a while. I don't know, so maybe, I don't know, 250? Also, that's gonna like make it formatted kind of funky, so we may just do with. Okay, that's pretty good. Okay, cool. And then need to something like class equals item card. And just need my- Oh, I'm putting this as string. Really good. Let's add some heading. Okay, then you may do like Flexbox or something like that to get these to like line up, but I'm not gonna do that. So, all right, so we're looping through our data, we've got our cards set up, data's being displayed correctly. So now it's just we need to have a button that we need to do on click. And that was like when we didn't have the tools we had before, that was the source of all the trouble. So that was like where all the duplicate code came from. It was like nasty. So we want one function that can handle the on click. And then all that needs to happen is that function needs to know what was clicked on. So we just need to figure out some way, whenever the on click thing is called, that we pass something to identify which element was clicked on. Does anybody know what that might be? Like what identifies the element that was clicked on? ID. So yeah, we can use the ID of the element clicked on. So we have this property called ID. So we can sort of just decide that that's what we're going to use to identify what was clicked on. So then what we can do is in this, when we create the HTML here, we need to add a button. And then we need to attach an event listener for that button that then calls our function and passes the ID for what was clicked on. So there's actually, this is gonna look a little funky, but there's actually a button on click style. Like, so we've used the event listener thing so far, typically add event listener. But there's some other syntaxes which look like this. So, yeah, we can actually like make the button and then just like directly put on click and then in quotes put this function that we want to call. And we can actually pass a parameter right here. And so this is where it gets nasty because we're like inside this template variable and then we're like writing HTML and then we're like putting this like string for a function and then we're trying to inject a variable into that function string. And it's like 3 levels deep of like weird string stuff happening. That's why React exists. Like, that's how we used to do it. This is like in the old days before Angular and React and Vue, which you'll hear about, are these like modern web frameworks. Like a big thing that those things initially solved was making this like binding between JavaScript and HTML much more fluid and much cleaner. And so this is nasty, but this is just kind of the way. This is like an old way that most people don't do it anymore because everybody uses a framework. Like no one really writes raw document.get element by ID stuff anymore. They typically use a modern framework. So, but this is what we can do with the tools we have currently. So we do this style, and when we do this on click, we can pass in the ID of the element. So in our function here, our item to display HTML, we have the item and we have the item ID. So if we add the button here and add that function call here, we can pass it the item ID here. So we may have our button down here. And this is like add to cart. And then we can do on click equals. And we're going to make a new function. The function is going to be a function add item to cart. And this will take a parameter, it will be the ID of the item that was clicked on. And so let's just like not get too far ahead of ourselves. Let's just see if like the base theory of how this is going to work is working. So we'll console log the ID and just make sure that this function is getting called whenever we click. Don't like do too much at one time. Just kind of make sure stuff is hooked up before you go too deep. And then we're going to call that function add item to cart. Normally we've seen like when you pass a function to something, you don't call it, but in this case you do, just because it's funky HTML stuff happening here. And then we're going to pass it our item.id. So pretty weird, I get it. And like, there's no way that you would have known how to, there's no way you would have figured this out. I mean, some of you, I guess, did figure it out, but you would have figured it out by like Googling it and someone being like, here's what you do. And you'd be like, that's weird. And so I only know about this because I saw it in an article that I was reading. So let's see if it's working. It might not be. Okay, there's our button. It's not fine. Coffee is not defined, what? Okay, so coffee is not defined, it's on line 13. What is this? It's not defined.
This may or may not be related, but like 3 hours I struggled with scope on this, and there were some things that I had to call after the page loaded to
Yeah.
reference it. So I don't know if this is the same thing, but it took me a long time.
Well, I would think. I don't know what coffee is. That's what's the most confusing thing is I don't know what. Okay, so this is such an important skill to learn. Like this is like you're every day that you write code, you're gonna run into bugs. And like this skill that's gonna get you the job versus not is just whether or not you can work through it. And it's not like an innate skill. It's something that happens with practice. And you have to like you'll figure out these like if something's not working, like what do you do? Like there's and like you just like identify these patterns of how to unbreak your stuff. So the first thing I did is I tried to read the error and try to find where the error was happening. And that didn't lead to anything useful. Like I don't know what coffee was. And you saw me search in the code, like, where's the word coffee even at? And like I couldn't find anything that made sense there. And also like it wasn't giving me a clear line of where it was happening. And that's because it's like happening sort of internally, like this on click is sort of like on the page and it wasn't able to give me a clear line where the problem was. So like the message and the line position weren't helping. And that sometimes happens. Like I've told you guys, if you get an error, read the error, look where it happens, and then go to where it happened. But that doesn't always work. So the second thing I do after that is, okay, that didn't work. The second thing is, okay, where and when is this bug happening? Well, it's not happening when the page loads. There's no error when the page loads. There's, like, it's only happening when I click. So when I click, that's when the error is happening. So it has to be related to the on-click code. So it had, like, the problem has to be somewhere on this, where I set up the on click, or where my, like, the function that I give it, right? So like, that should be where this problem is. And also, like, because we've tested this program as we've built it, like, it's been working. And then, so like, if you kind of test the program as you build it, you know, okay, this was introduced since the last time I checked and verified it worked. So what have I done since the last, like, what has changed in this program since it broke? Well, the only stuff that's changed is I added the button and I added this function, right? So it, like, it's, something has to be happening there. So then, like, I had kind of jumped a few steps. I had done the button, I had done the on-click, I had passed it a function for the on-click, and I had also passed it a variable. And so I was like, okay, I'm just gonna take a step back. And I'm just gonna remove, maybe the parameter thing is wrong. So I'm just gonna remove passing a parameter to the function, and then I just want to log, like, so I removed passing a parameter, but I still have the parameter, but that doesn't matter. So I removed that, and then I just want to see, is this function being called at all? Like, or is the error still throwing even then? So that's the first step I took, and that revealed, okay, now there's actually no error anymore, and it is being called. So, like, hopefully at least some of that thinking process, like, makes a little bit of sense, and like, you can start, like, building these tools of how to, like, whenever this happens, how to fix it without freaking out, thinking you don't know what you're doing, because this always happens. So, all right, so there's something wrong. There's something wrong with like, when I was passing it something. So, can I pass it anything? So, like, and what's the syntax for that? Because I'm in this, like, weird, I'm in this, like, really weird situation here. So I'm guessing there's something wrong with the way that I was passing it. So, like, can I pass it a number? So let me go ahead and log ID again, and, like, if I pass it like 0, does that work? Okay, that works. So if I pass it a string hello, like, what's the syntax for that? So does this work? Yeah, okay, so I think I need to, so this is, like, what's really weird, is I think I need to wrap my variable in the single quotes. Like, I was injecting something that was, like, not an actual string, which is supposed to be, I was injecting just this, like, raw text, and the program just freaked out at that point. So I need to wrap it and then do item dot ID. So I think, yeah, okay. So now we fixed it. So that was a pretty weird bug. And you also could have, like, probably if you had looked up a guide on how to do this, like, you would have seen that in the guide and probably wouldn't have had that bug. But I was just kind of doing it without following the guide. Okay, so you may be a little bit lost, but what's really cool that we've done, what we've accomplished, is, like, with one function, we can have an action tied to clicking the add item to the cart, and we also know what they clicked on. So we don't have, like, added coffee to cart, added coffee grinder to cart. And if you think about it, like, if you're building a true dynamic website that's going to have thousands and thousands of garage sales on it, the code of, like, having a function for everything that would be on there is not possible. You have to be able to have something dynamic like this, because you may have one item, you may have 1,000 items. You can't hard code all those items. So you have to be able to accomplish something like this. So that's good. We did that. So when we add an item to the cart, we just need to, we have the ID of it. And so we just need to find that item in this array. You know what, I think we can even pass the item itself if we want to, instead of just the ID, but, so we need to find that item that we want to add to the cart. Or we can just add the ID to the shopping cart. I guess probably adding the ID to the shopping cart makes the most sense. So we'll do shopping cart dot push ID. Okay, so I think there's probably like another hour left of coding to actually get this thing working. And I don't want to hold you guys here that long. So what I think might be good is I know some of you have already done something similar to this, like and did the extra project. So this may not be relevant to you, but for people that didn't do this style, that didn't know about it, and people that didn't do the project, like I'll give you guys, I think you guys should take a break, first of all. So we've been going for 8 weeks. And so I wasn't planning on giving any homework or anything or pre-work for the next module. But if you want to, like you could try to continue on this thread with the code. So I'll push this code out and you can kind of continue trying to make this work with what we have currently. And then I can finish it on my own and I can record myself doing that if you want. And then I'll just send like not like a pretty, but like a fully functioning version of this maybe in a week. And then you guys can kind of look at that and see how I did it at that point. And also have taken an attempt to do it yourself if you want to. So yeah, I think that's probably, does that sound okay, everybody? Okay. So yeah, I'll push up like a fully functioning version of this Saturday, a week from now. And then for anybody that wants to, you can try to do this on your own before then. But yeah, try to take a few days off and relax. And I think it's important during this journey just to like, I mean, you eventually need to be coding every day, but like, it's good to take breaks. So yeah, we'll do that. And then I think when's our get together?
So,
Okay, so that's not for a few weeks. Okay. But yeah, everybody, I hope everybody is joining for module 3. Module 3 is historically where we lose a lot of people. But then it gets super fun in module 4. That's when we start doing React, and like it's like really React is really fun and really powerful. So yeah, I hope everybody that's still feeling like they like coding will continue the journey with us, and everybody have a good break. Any questions or anything? Thanks, everybody.